Hello everybody, welcome back, and today I'm going to be doing a video on the INTJ and the INTP. The coldest human and the warmest machine are two nicknames that I've seen for these types online, and the reason I'm doing a video on these two specifically is that because a lot of people who are new to the Myers-Briggs type indicator will get mistyped or confused between these two. There's only a one-letter difference. How can they be so different? And one of the major reasons this is that because the INTP and the INTJ are commonly known for being the two most intelligent of the 16 personality types. That does not mean that INTPs and INTJs will always be smarter than the other 14 types. That's type bias. But on average, INTPs and INTJs have the highest average IQ and knowledge base of the types. Alright, I'm going to start off by explaining the differences in the cognitive functions of the two types. The INTJ has dominant introverted intuition supported by secondary extroverted thinking. They have tertiary introverted feeling with repressed extroverted sensing. The INTP has dominant introverted thinking, secondary extroverted intuition, tertiary introverted sensing, and repressed extroverted feeling. The one main difference between the two primary pairs of each type is that introverted intuition is very fluid, while introverted thinking is very strict. Extroverted thinking in the INTJ asks, is this going to work? How can we do this? I have to go about doing this. Whereas extroverted intuition in the INTP says, how can I use the information I have? What ideas can I produce with the framework I have? I'm going to go a little bit more in-depth on the INTJ thought process now. The INTJ thought process is the one that's going to be most familiar to me, and it's going to be easier to explain because that's what I am and that's my type, that's how I think. It starts off with extroverted sensing, and extroverted sensing is our repressed function, but sensing is how we receive data from the outside world usually, especially extroverted sensing. To the INTJ, we subconsciously retrieve information from what we are seeing and physically feeling in the world around us. We see something and we feel something, or we taste something, or we hear something, and it feeds into our introverted intuition. It feeds into our subconscious, which produces flashes of insight. It produces visions about this information and how it can be used. It is not as strict and step-by-step as introverted thinking. It's spontaneous. It just happens. We receive information in our mind. It's commonly explained by some people as a man standing on a cliff and there's clouds below him, and just something comes out of the clouds, and that's the answer he receives, and he doesn't know exactly where from below the clouds it came from, but it popped up and it was there. Then extroverted thinking takes this vision and takes this insight and refines it. It circles it. It's like a vulture circling its prey. It waits for the exact moment to strike, and then it perfects this idea. And once this idea, this vision has been perfected, the INTJ will push with full force. Everything they have goes into making this vision a reality because they have seen a very possible outcome of the future. They have seen an outcome that they know is possible, that they know is realistic, and they will push with everything they have to make this reality come to fruition. They will do anything in their power. Especially, a lot of people refer to the INTJs as cold and apathetic, and the reason this is not only is our feeling function our tertiary function, which is the one we usually interact with the least, even less so than our repressed fourth function. Our feeling is tertiary and it's introverted. It's the very last thing on our mind usually. Feelings are something that we just don't commonly associate with. We don't think about our feelings. And because of this, when we receive a vision or an outcome that we want, we will push aside our own feelings and needs to make this reality come to fruition. The INTJ is often known for being very picky about knowledge. An INTJ doesn't necessarily view knowledge as something that they universally need as the INTP. They see a goal that they want and they will fully research knowledge around that single goal. They will make sure they can learn everything they need to push to make that goal come to fruition. They usually don't enjoy learning things that they don't need. A lot of times, I remember back in school, I disliked classes with information that I deemed useless. If it didn't prove a purpose to me, why do I need it? Whereas an INTP is more likely to enjoy having that information because it builds upon their internal framework and structure. The thought process of the INTJ is very spontaneous and instant. And a lot of times we have trouble explaining how we got to the conclusion we did. It jumps to the very end. It jumps to the answer without having the information in the middle. Back again to school, back in mathematics, I'm not very good at mathematics. I'm bad at mathematics because it tends to be more of a step-by-step thing. In middle school and high school, I would take tests and I would give answers and I wouldn't write down the work on how I did it. And my teachers would go, "Well, how did you get this?" And I'd say, "Well, I just knew. It just it came to me." And they'd be, "No, that can't be right. You're cheating." So then they would ask me multiple times. This happened. They would ask me to take a test privately with them, with no other students around. Excuse me. And again, I would score around the same as I did previously, and they would go, how did you do this? You didn't write any work down. And I would go, it's just how my mind works. I don't like writing the work down. I don't enjoy doing the steps. I want the answer, and I know I can get there, and I don't always want to do the things in the middle, which is the one weakness of the INTJ, is we push and push and push for the outcome we want, and a lot of times we skip the middle parts. We skip our feelings, we skip our needs, we skip the needs of others, and that's why a lot of times we come off as cold and apathetic. And that's generally how the INTJ thought process works. Alright, now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the INTP thought process. And while I am not an INTP, I have done a lot of research into the INTP thought process, and one of my very best friends growing up was an INTP. We spent a lot of time together. So the first thing to note is that the INTP thought process is strict. And the reason this is because they have an internal framework, an internal structure of information. What happens is they learn information, they receive it from the outside world, and it's easily remembered because they have a preference for introverted sensing over extroverted sensing. And introverted sensing tends to be more memory-based than extroverted sensing, which is in the present. This information is then fed into their introverted thinking. And what introverted thinking does is it builds an internal structure, it builds an internal framework. And one thing I'm going to say that's very important is that an internal framework, an internal structure such as this, is only as strong as you build it. An INTP, just because they are an INTP, that doesn't make them smart. It means that they have probably a very high potential for being smart, but if they build this foundation, or this foundation is built incorrectly, then things can go wrong. And that's one of the problems INTPs face. So INTPs continue to build upon this framework and continue to build upon this structure until it gets higher and higher and higher. And then what they enjoy doing is expressing how this framework can be used. They will enjoy conceptualizing. They enjoy producing ideas. What if this? What if that? How can we use this? What is it useful for? A lot of times I know with INTPs, they enjoy theory crafting. They enjoy just, well, I'm going to do this, and this is how I'm going to do it. And a lot of times they craft these theories, and they're less likely to pull through with them than an INTJ who has crafted a single idea and will push with full force to make this idea come into reality. One example I very much enjoy using when explaining the differences between INTJs and INTPs is Nikola Tesla and Albert Einstein. Nikola Tesla is a famous figure in history, an INTJ, and he's famous because he was so far ahead of his time in his thoughts. He experimented and created things that people thought impossible at his time. He started building the framework for electricity and electronics as we know today. He envisioned back in the early 1900s wireless transmissions of data before they were even a thing in, I don't know, the 80s, 90s. I'm sorry, I don't know much about when that came into being. But the point is that he saw these visions, he saw these outcomes in his mind, and then he pushed full force to make these visions a reality. And he a lot of times would kind of skip the data. He preferred experimenting over sitting in a lab writing down calculations on how these things will work. Whereas Albert Einstein, an INTP, extremely skilled in mathematics, extremely smart, he had an IQ of 160, preferred to sit and think and conceptualize on things. A scientist like that prefers to sit in the lab and write down the mathematical equation for flying a rocket ship, whereas an INTJ isn't going to enjoy that. INTPs are the ones who are writing down the calculations, they're writing down the ideas and frameworks on how these things are going to work. It's like coding with a computer. An INTP is probably far more likely to enjoy coding than an INTJ, unless an INTJ sees a purpose for that code, such as Mark Zuckerberg, who, by the way, is an INTJ. INTPs enjoy the step-by-step process because for them, in their framework, that's just how the world works. They see that step-by-step process as normal. It's something they are good at, and it's comforting to them. That's why they tend to have a higher potential for intelligence than the INTJ. While the INTJ is typically known for having a higher average intelligence, INTPs have a higher potential. And what this means is that, as I said earlier, the INTPs have that structure that's only as strong as you build it. That structure can be a house or it can be a skyscraper. It could reach to the heavens. But, again, it can be as small as a house. Whereas an INTJ who sees the world through a different lens than the introverted thinker is less likely to have a lower level of intelligence. INTJs typically are able to spot flaws in ideas, and this leads the INTJ to be iconoclastic. And if you don't know what that means, an iconoclast is someone who challenges regularly held beliefs. And it's not just for the sake of, well, I don't want to do this, your idea is stupid. It's not anarchy-like. An iconoclast sees a flaw in an idea and then presents that flaw with a reason as to why it's flawed. They're not just saying it's bad because it's bad. They're saying it's wrong and here is why. And that's why INTJs tend to have a higher average intelligence, is because they tend to question everything they see. You are going to have a very hard time manipulating an INTJ because they question every motive they come across. When someone asks me a question, I'm very likely, it annoys people, I'm very likely to ask them why they're asking that question, or at least wonder it in my head. And a lot of times they'll go, just give me the answer, stop being in my business. And I'll go, but in my mind, I'm like, well, I want to know why you want to know that. And it's because we see life from a bird's eye point of view. We play life like a game of chess, whereas INTPs are able to do that as well, but they are less concerned with a singular outcome, and they're less concerned with all of that than the INTJ is. One thing I want to talk about more before I go is the INTJ and INTP feeling functions. And for the INTP, they have repressed extroverted feeling. And for a lot of INTPs, especially younger ones, this is going to be a problem because they're not going to know how to handle their emotions well when thoughts fail them. And that's exactly what it sounds like. And because they're so used to having their thoughts as their dominant function, when things go bad or things start stressing them and they resort to their feelings, they don't know what to do with them. And it's very easy for an INTP to go from 0 to 100 just like that. They're just going to snap and they're going to blow up for a second. And they're going to be like, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. But an INTJ is less likely to do so. INTJs have an extremely long fuse with an even bigger bomb at the end. I heard that off of the INTJ YouTuber channel, so that's not my idea, but I'm going to use it for this video to help explain. And what that means is that since emotions for the INTJ are so far pushed back, they are tertiary and they are introverted, if you manage to trigger an emotional response from an INTJ, it's a very bad thing because that is our absolute last resort. We do not like using our emotions at all. So if we are mad at you, something is very, very wrong. You are in trouble with that INTJ. They're likely not going to like you anymore if it continues to be a problem. Whereas the INTP may blow up for a second, but it's probably not going to change their overall view for you if that emotional response was short and out of hand, because they are going to subconsciously realize that it was their fault or it was a problem that shouldn't have been overreacted to. Now, one big difference in extroverted feeling and introverted feeling is that the INTP with extroverted feeling is going to fit into society a little bit better than the INTJ. Both types are extremely introverted, but because INTPs have extroverted feeling, which is harmonious in nature, they are going to, at least a little bit, want to fit in. Whereas the INTJ with introverted feeling tends to do its own thing. They're not really going to care about fitting in. They're not going to care what you think. And that sounds heartless, but that's really how INTJs tend to think, especially when they're pushing to make an outcome to come to reality, is that if you have a negative thought about us, we don't care because your opinion isn't going to affect what I'm doing. We often tend to know what people think about us anyway. I tell people often I don't enjoy small talk because I'm able to predict the entire conversation within 2 seconds of you saying something. If you come up to me and you say hello, okay, you said, hey, how are you doing? I go, all right, I'm doing good, how are you? And then you tell me about your day, and I don't really care about your day most of the time unless you're someone that I care about deeply. And that sounds mean, but an INTP is probably more interested in things like that than the INTJ, who is pushing to make something come, and your feelings about how your day are don't really matter. They don't benefit that idea. They don't benefit the outcome. And that's one of the reasons that we come off as apathetic. Alright, that's all the time I have for this one, and I actually really enjoyed talking about and doing this video, and I hope that these points helped you understand the differences between the INTP and INTJ. And if you enjoyed this video, let me know, and if for some reason you'd like me to go even more in depth, because I have a lot more I can say about the INTP and INTJ, let me know. I'd be willing to do another video if it's something that people would enjoy learning about. Alright, thank you for tuning in and watching. Leave me some feedback, let me know. Have a good one.